A reader asks, I find myself constantly scrolling through social media, mostly Instagram, comparing my life to the carefully curated images I see online. It's affecting my self-esteem and making me feel inadequate. I know logically that I shouldn't compare myself to all these lifestyle influencers on social media, but I can't seem to stop. How can I break my social media habit, addiction, and cultivate more contentment with my own life? Now, the standard advice in situations like this is, well, if social media are making you unhappy, just stop using social media. But what if social media aren't the real problem when it comes to your low self-esteem? Or, more provocatively, what if you're scapegoating social media as a way to avoid a more fundamental cause of your low self-esteem? Hi, I'm Nick Wignall. I'm a clinical psychologist and the founder of The Friendly Mind, a free weekly newsletter where I share practical, evidence-based advice for emotional health and well-being. And in the rest of this video, we are going to unpack what's really going on with this relationship between social media use and low self-esteem. So if I asked you, well, why do you follow all these influencers on social media? What would you say? Maybe something like because they periodically give you discount codes on cool wellness products? Maybe. But even if that's true, it's kind of a fringe benefit, right? I doubt that's the core motivation behind your social media use. Maybe it's because you're bored and it just gives you something else to do. Again, maybe, right? I'm sure that happens sometimes. Sometimes we get bored and fill it with social media use. But is that really the main driver behind this admittedly frequent and intense habit of using social media? I kind of doubt it. Maybe it's something more psychologically sophisticated. Maybe you think your social media use is an avoidance mechanism to escape emotional pain. That sounds fancy and maybe true, right? Well, I would say once again, I'm sure that happens sometimes. We feel crappy, we feel anxious, we feel sad, we feel guilty, whatever it is. And rather than dealing with that or even investigating that emotional pain, we just hop on Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is as a way to escape or avoid or numb out that emotional pain. And again, sure, I bet you that happens sometimes. But does that really happen in most of the cases? Is that the precise reason why you're so driven to use social media? Again, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical that that's the core motivation, the core driver behind it. I think most people's core motivation for using social media is something much closer to this. We consume social media because we crave agency. So here's my little theory, a little three-step theory on this idea of using social media as a way to gain agency. Most of us don't have nearly as much agency in our lives as we would like. One way to think about this is, I think for most people, if their life was a movie, most of the time, they feel like an extra rather than the hero, the protagonist, or maybe even the director. But people are also afraid of exercising their agency, whether it's fear of failure or social anxiety, childhood trauma. There could be hundreds, thousands of potential reasons why. A lot of people are terrified of taking the reins and taking control of their own life. Consequently, they fall into what at least feels like the next best thing, which is watching other people who have, or at least appear to have, high levels of agency on social media. In other words, the appeal of following these influencers on Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and all the other places is that by kind of watching and following along with the life of someone with high agency, we feel like we're participating in that agency somehow. And maybe even one day they will, inspire us to exercise more agency in our own life. I think that's the kind of vague logic that goes through our heads. Not super explicitly, but there it is. I think that's what's going on for most of us in terms of the core motivation for engaging with social media. Now, seen through this lens, I think your social media use is not necessarily objectively bad or harmful. Another way to look at this is that it's actually signaling to you something you need to do in order to build healthier, stronger self-esteem, namely exercising more agency in your life. See, often low self-esteem comes about because of a lack of agency. And this makes sense if you think about it. It's hard to esteem yourself when you're just sort of passively floating through life rather than taking the reins and directing it according to your authentic desires and goals. But as we already alluded to before, there's still this fear issue. Even if you know you want to be more agentic, you want to exercise more agency in your life, It's scary, sometimes terrifying for a lot of us. It's in some ways, it's a lot easier, if more depressing, to just sort of hang out in the back seat, metaphorically speaking, and let someone else drive our life. So, what do we do about this fear that obstructs our ability to exercise more agency in our life and therefore have higher, healthier self-esteem? Well, like most fears, they're only terrifying because of this strange little habit we have of only thinking about the big, scary, super intense version of them. So we imagine I'm going to quit my miserable job and go back to school and become a doctor. Whoa, like that's, I mean, maybe, but that's intense. There's a lot of moving pieces there. That is understandably scary, even just thinking about that. Or, you know what? I'm going to write that novel. I'm going to sit on my computer and start writing my novel. Whoa, like maybe sounds like a good idea, but once you sit down, that's pretty intimidating. It's so big and complex. There's so many moving pieces in that. Or I'm going to, you know what? I'm done with this place. I'm selling my house. I'm moving to Costa Rica. I mean, I get the impulse, but that's a big decision, right? And when you really take time to process how big and complicated a decision that is, you're going to get hit by kind of a wave of almost paralyzing fear or uncertainty, which is then going to lead you to avoid it and just kind of disregard the goal entirely. And of course, these things are terrifying to the point of paralysis. I mean, if you had never run more than a mile in your life and someone told you, you know what, you should run a marathon, you'd be like, yeah, right. Like that would be very scary, overwhelming, terrifying. We only overcome our fears by working through them incrementally. That's the key word, incrementally, which literally means in increments, small pieces. So slowly and steadily facing our fears, starting with the small ones. And as we, again, slowly build up both competence and confidence, we can work our way up the ladder to face bigger and more intense fears. But you can't just jump from 0 to 60 all at once. You have to go through those graduated stages first. And I think if you think about your own life, this is how there's probably some fear that you've overcome. And that's how it happens. It's just one thing after another. Gradually, we work our way over something. Well, exercising agency, becoming more agentic in your own life, it's really the same thing. Let's go back to our example of writing a novel. Let's say you want to write a novel, but you're terrified by the prospect of it because it seems so big and overwhelming and scary. Ask yourself this: what's the 5% version of my goal? So, for instance, again, if your goal is writing a novel, maybe the 5% version, the really tiny kind of first step you could take. It's not even the first step, honestly. It's a first step. There's probably a lot of first steps you could take. But let's say you want to write a fantasy novel. So the 5% version is, you know what? I'm going to draw a map of this fantasy world where my novel is going to take place. Sounds kind of fun, way less pressure, doesn't even involve writing, but it will build momentum. It'll get you moving in the right direction. Or maybe in just 2 or 3 sentences each, you write some descriptions of some of the main characters. See, you're not even writing the novel yet. You're just kind of getting started in a way that's relatively easy and a little bit fun, hopefully. Or maybe you just kind of think about your own favorite novels, things you've read. Just make a list of your 3, 4, 5 favorite novels and write a few thoughts about what you really like about them. Again, this is sort of an indirect way of getting started on your goal, but it's much less intimidating because it's just the bitty 5% version. But as you do this, as you make progress, you will start to build confidence and competence, which will allow you to tackle the next level of goals, the 10% sort of goals, whatever those might look like. In short, often the best way to get over any fear is to give yourself permission to work on a much smaller scale. And I believe this is true for building agency just as much as anything else. So instead of framing your self-esteem problems in terms of, what do I need to remove from my life in order to feel more contentment, including maybe removing social media use, I would encourage you to reframe it as, how can I slowly and consistently start adding more agency building behaviors into my life? So here's your homework. I want you to grab a pen and paper. I want you to go to a coffee shop, nice coffee shop, or maybe a park, wherever it is, some nice place, maybe your backyard, whatever it is. And I want you to write down, just sort of brainstorm, what are some ideas for small behaviors? Remember the 5% rule, something really tiny that would help you start to build more agency in your life. Just brainstorm. They can be good, bad, terrible, beautiful, inspiring, whatever. You're just trying to get a lot of them out there. I think it's going to be a really good step to starting to build the agency, which then feeds healthy self-esteem. I think that overall, that's a more helpful way of looking at how do you deal with this self-esteem problem. But let me end with a little bit of a twist that brings us back to social media, which, as you may have realized, I've been sort of avoiding as we've been talking about this. I actually don't think most people need to stop or even limit their social media use in order to improve or strengthen their self-esteem. In fact, I think a really good way to fast track your agency building is this. It's a little counterintuitive, but use social media better, not less. I think social media platforms are a tool, and like any tool, they can obviously be used well or poorly. But just because they're frequently used poorly by people who aren't even really thinking about how they're using them, that's no reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And when it comes to this project of building more agency, which remember we talked about as kind of the cornerstone of healthy self-esteem, I actually think social media can have some really powerful and distinctive benefits. Namely, they're social. And in my experience, it's much easier certainly to get started, but to continue building agency in yourself when you are, for one thing, surrounded by a group of like-minded peers with similar goals and aspirations and values. Maybe they're even struggling with similar things as you. It's also really helpful to be in sort of a group or a network or a community where there are role models for you, people who haven't like succeeded, capital S succeeded, but maybe they're one or two stages ahead of you on the journey. Those are really powerful relationships to help you continue to cultivate agency and make progress on your goals. And again, taking the reins and living your life the way you really want to. But then also, maybe most importantly, being embedded in a community of people, like-minded people, it allows you to give back, to contribute, to help others. And again, in my experience, that is such an underrated but powerful way to start building agency and ultimately self-esteem. So, like I said, I think social media, when used well, are actually ideally positioned to help you build more agency and self-esteem in your life. So just to make this concrete, back to the novel writing example, the first thing I would do if I was trying to write a novel that I was terrified about it, I would say, okay, what's my favorite social media platform? I really like Twitter, for instance. So I'd hop on Twitter and I'd start looking for who are people who, like me, are interested in writing a novel, but maybe specifically people who are just started or who haven't even started yet, but are also looking for advice. So I'd start searching and looking for those kind of people, following them if I could, if there's different ways to follow people and keep track of them. And then I would start very simply in little ways engaging with them. So if I saw, Nick put out a post about how he's struggling to find a good piece of software to write his novel in, I might leave a little reply and say like, yeah, man, I've been struggling with the same thing too. But I just heard about this new one. Have you heard about this? Leave that as a comment. Maybe give a little nice word of encouragement, something like that. Then start to do that. But then as you get a little bit more comfortable, start sharing little bits of your own experience with the community. Even though it feels like, you've only got 10 followers and it feels like you're just sort of speaking into the void, it's okay. Just get started sharing little bits of your own story and your own kind of agency experience as a writer in this example. So maybe you ask a question, right? Or you ask for some advice. Maybe you share a tip that you found that's been helpful for you. Or maybe you share a little small victory. You got something to work, you finished some little goal, share that with the world. In other words, start being actually social on social media. I think you'll find that when you approach social media from an active and productive mindset rather than a passive and consumptive one, you'll find that social media can actually enhance your agency agenda and your project to build healthier self-esteem instead of detracting from it. All right, thanks for watching. I hope this has been helpful for any of you who are struggling with a similar kind of issue of the connection between social media use and low self-esteem. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another video I want to recommend to you that I did recently. It's called 4 Habits That Cause Low Self-Esteem. So if you want to investigate more kind of the fundamental causes of low self-esteem, if that's something you struggle with, this video I think is going to be really helpful. So you can check it out right here.